Relatives, I want to say good evening to each one of you, and I want to welcome you to this community meeting concerning our self-governance project. And we have our meal prepared out there, and we're going to be asking for some help on serving. I see Matt came in, so I know that he'll help. And see Frank sitting over there, and I'll see he'll probably help too. But before we partake of our evening meal, I'm going to call upon our relative, Frank Lemire, to say a prayer over this meal.
Relatives, welcome all of you tonight. Good to see all of you. I would share with you, I remind us all as we gather that we've been told that at times like this, there's a special blessing that goes with these kind of things when we're asked to share and offer up an invocation. And I would share with you, I certainly need those special blessings, and so do all of us. Let me go ahead and humbly and clearly as I can offer up a word of prayer and invocation for us. My own Heavenly Father, Creator of all things, you have taught us over the many generations and in our lives to understand that there's no coincidence, that all has been foretold, all has been preordained. You have determined that this many of us would come together at this place, at this time, to talk about the issues before us, to talk about how things could be and how things should be among the families, the extended families, and even all of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And we give you thanks for that. We have come to know that you hear our humble and fervent prayers when we come to you striving for humility. And we come to you striving for humility now. We come to you pitifully, asking that you come into our hearts, come into our minds, guide us in what we say, guide us in what we do, as we work to try to ensure a future for our children, the grandchildren, and the generations to come. We say pinagigi to you for allowing us to come here, for allowing us to partake, and to strengthen ourselves in our mind, our body, and our spirit as we gather. Mauna, we are thankful for these things, and we ask that you hear our humble and fervent petition at this time. Mauna, I have come to understand that I'm not wise enough to know what's in the hearts and the minds of all those gathered here. I do not know what they want for themselves, for their families, their extended families, for their children, the grandchildren, for all of the people. So as we come together and offer this prayer, I hope and ask, Mauna, that you understand what is in the hearts and minds of all gathered here, that you hear their humble and understand their fervent prayers that they have for the people, prayers that all of us collectively offer up to you at this very critical time. Mauna, we come here to talk a little bit about our health and our well-being. We come here because we want to live. We want to grow. We want to flourish. And we ask that you guide us, that you be with us in these deliberations this night. Mauna, we say pinagigi, bless this food, bless all who've come here at this place at this time. Amen.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, as I said, we have the meal up in the back there. Going to ask for some volunteers to help serve. I think some of you have picked up the agenda, so you have an idea on the time frame. We're going to try and stick as close as possible to the schedule. So you can go ahead and start the line, starting on this side, and work that way.
every night in America, people make something for dinner. But some of us make something much more.
I'm gonna be proud.
With Blue Apron, any night is a chance to see what cooking can do.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. While some of you are still eating, as I said earlier, we're going to try and stick to the agenda and the time frame as close as possible. Just to give you a little bit of information, the tribe has been working on this effort for approximately 3 years, and it was mainly due to the decertification of the hospital that we have here in Winnebago, and we are concerned, about the health care, the services that have been provided, to all of our relatives, and this is what has prompted this. We've been attempting to have community meetings, throughout this past year, and we received comments, questions, and our steering committee has addressed some of those. And our steering committee has been putting together an agenda on how we're going to accomplish this. There's a lot of things that are in the works, a lot of things that need to get done. And we're the only large tribe with a large hospital that's making this effort. Many of you are aware that Indian Health Service has been having issues in the Great Plains area with their service units, with their hospitals, and this is what has prompted us to pursue this compact. So I'm glad that this many could enjoy and come and enjoy this meal, and then listen to the information that's going to be provided. So with that, I'm going to have Victoria Ketchion, our tribal council member. She's the point of contact for all of our health issues, and she's been sitting on the steering committee for some time, and she's very knowledgeable, and I'm going to have her introduce the steering committee to you. And at the table in the back, you were issued some cards, and on the cards they ask you to put your questions down or your comments, and someone from the steering committee will address those if time permits. So if you haven't done that, the cards are in the back table. We've already received several, so we're going to try and answer a lot of those questions. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Victoria.
Thank you, Chairman White. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending the community meeting. It's great to see this many people come out and want to get the information firsthand. And I appreciate you all coming, because you're going to go home and tell your families, your coworkers, and some of our community members that weren't able to make it out this evening. So as Chairman White explained, I'm one of the council members that have been working closely on the self-governance project. I'm on the steering committee, and what that is, it's a collective group of tribal folks and subject matter experts that the tribal council has gathered to do this work, do this research, select the pertinent information from IHS or the area office, whether it be headquarters. And so it's a very dynamic team of subject matter experts that have been able to see this effort to this point. It started with the tribal council learning about what self-governance is. It took us going to different meetings, conferences, and really engaging in the material to understand what it would mean for the Winnebago tribe and the service unit here. So it was at a juncture in that field work that the tribe decided that we had no choice but to move forward with the self-governance compacting of the facility. and that's what brought us to developing this team. Our team is made up of Sharon Frenchman, the CEO, Danelle Smith, General Counsel for the tribe, Joy Johnson, Planning Department Director, Mona Zavante, Tribal Health Director, Alan Post, the CFO, Myra Munson, and Colin Hampson from Sonosky and Chambers. So it's with this group of folks that there's been countless meetings and emails and just so much work that has gone into this thorough process. And the tribe has taken great care in each step, because we want this to be the best turnaround, the top-notch healthcare facility for all those Native Americans that choose to walk through that door and have their healthcare delivered. We want to raise the quality of healthcare for each and every Native American that has the opportunity to use those services. And it's this team of folks that are going to see this through and ensure to you that we've got a quality facility to deliver good healthcare to all of us. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Myra Munson, and she's going to do a PowerPoint and really break down some of the background information on this process. And there will also be an opportunity again for you to ask questions at the beginning of Myra's presentation, as well as throughout with your note cards. So please take the time to write those note cards down and ask what you really want to know. We're here to have candid conversation and really alleviate some of the community's concerns, some of the IHS employees' concerns. And so I also want to acknowledge all those watching the live stream. We appreciate you logging in and taking the opportunity to hear the information. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Colin Cloud Hampson. I'm a colleague of Myra Munson. We're outside attorneys assisting the tribe with this self-governance project. I have roots here in this community. My great-grandfather was Henry Rocloud. My mother is Wosha Hampson, who's enrolled in this tribe. My grandmother was Ann Wosha Cloud North. And I actually lived here when I was in kindergarten and first grade. And so it's a real honor for me to be here assisting this community with these really important steps, working to try to make your healthcare, improve the healthcare services available in this community. So let me turn this over to Myra, and I'll be around for the rest of the evening. If for any questions or concerns, I'll be assisting with the presentation.
Thank you, Colin. I'm Myra Munson. I was a partner in the Sonosky firm and until about a year ago when I started the process of retiring. But I remain a part of the firm and had been working with the Winnebago tribe since mid-2015 in its process of evaluating self-governance. In my past practice, my work has heavily emphasized self-determination and self-governance since I joined the firm in 1990 when I had just left the post of Commissioner of Health and Social Services for the state of Alaska, which is my home community where I grew up, I'm born and grew up and live. I have worked with tribes in every area of the Indian Health Service and have worked in self-governance tribes in 10 of the areas. So this is something about which I know a lot, but each situation is unique. Each one presents its own issues and concerns. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have as we talk about qualifications and so on, but I want to have us get into the presentation, but it's helpful for me to know who's here. A little bit more about that. And I wonder, how many people here are hospital employees? Good. It's good to have some employees here. And I hope there are others on live stream watching and learning more about this process because it's really important for you and it's important for the tribe that the employees have correct, accurate information about this. How many have ever worked for IHS, Indian Health Service here? There's some more folks. Some of you are still working for Indian Health Service, obviously. I have to admit that because of the lights for the live streaming, I can see your hands wave, but I have absolutely no idea to whom I'm speaking. And in some cases, even gender, there's sort of shapes out there, but not much more. And so I apologize if I usually watch the facial expressions of audience pretty closely, and if somebody's looking really puzzled or uncomfortable, I can tell if they have a question or something that's really driving them crazy, but I can't do that tonight. So if you're concerned about anything, raise your hand, wave around, let Colin or Danelle know so that I can be sure to respond to you. How many of you have been patients at the hospital, clinics, programs here? That's good. Most of you use the health programs that are here. And maybe some of you just chose not to raise your hand. How many of you are from the Winnebago tribe? Good number. How many from the Omaha tribe? Obviously, you are very closely, you engage a lot. And you live nearby, and you're intermarried, and you live close together. That's not surprising, and it's good that there are members of the tribe here and learning this information. I know the chairman was here earlier, and I think he was planning to come back. I hope that's the case. What I'm going to be discussing in this PowerPoint, not necessarily in the order these questions appear on this page, and I think you each have a copy of it in case you have any trouble seeing this. So I want to before I start, you all have received cards, and really quite a number of those questions, really good questions, have come, and we've been looking at them and thinking about where do they fit best in this presentation. But is there anybody with a question who hasn't already posed it? If you would write it down, or if you're really uncomfortable writing it down, would you wave your hand so we find out what that is now? I want to be certain that the questions you have about this are answered before you leave. There's a ton of information. I've done presentations on self-governance and self-determination that have lasted 20 minutes, and I've done presentations that have lasted 3 days. It's a very involved area. I want to be sure that you get the questions you have answered as we go through this. So I'll trust that if you have a question along the way, write it down, wave your hand. Somebody will come and get that from you on the card, and we'll make sure it gets addressed before the end of the evening. So I'm going to walk through this PowerPoint, and I think you all have copies of it. It has more information, more detailed information probably than I'll address. So we're going to try to talk about what, why, who, how, some other issues associated with self-governance and self-determination, so you can leave here knowing more about it. The most fundamental question is, what is self-governance? This is one answer. Self-governance is a program of the Indian Health Service under which tribes and tribal organizations can take over IHS programs and funding. In self-governance, the tribe has great flexibility to design the program to best meet the needs of its own community. I promise I will not read all the slides. But I wanted to read that one. But what I want to say that is more important about self-governance is self-governance is inherent to your tribe. Every government, as it makes decisions, federal, state, local, tribal, maybe most especially tribal, every decision you make is a self-governing decision. A decision to take over a hospital is a self-governance decision. A decision not to do that is a self-governance decision. A decision to take over a program under one part of the Self-Determination Act instead of another, that's a self-governance decision. All of those are self-governance decisions. By the nature of being a tribe, you are self-governing. The self-governance program is intended by IHS, and it actually became part of the law after I was practicing in Indian law. It's intended to reflect the level of authority and decision-making deference that the federal government should recognize that tribes have. So when they talk about the self-governance program, it really is not only just the transfer of a program, but it's a recognition of authority and the right of tribes to act on their own behalf. And that is the consequence of decisions that the Congress has made since the 70s. Okay, let's see if I get this. Okay, so there's basics. There are lots of pieces of this. I'm going to try to walk through many of those pieces as we go through this presentation. I'm going to start with this. There are 5 parts of the Self-Determination Act. The 2 we are focusing on are Title I, which most of you probably know is 638. The law is actually Public Law 93-638, and it covers all of these parts. But for many parts of the country, tribes when they think of self-determination, they think of Title I, they think of 638. That's what it was referred to, that's what they do. And the programs that your tribe, the Winnebago tribe, is operating right now are all in Title I, they're all the 638 programs. Title III was a demonstration project that was enacted in 1994 by the Congress as a reflection that the efforts Congress had made, the statements they had made about turning over control to tribes were really not occurring as well as they were intended under Title I, under that self-determination program. IHS was still exercising a lot of control, making a lot of decisions for tribes, telling the tribes what they could and should do to a much greater extent than tribes wanted them to in many cases, and more than the Congress intended that they do. Tribes asked for an opportunity to do a demonstration to look at what would happen if tribes were truly given the authority, once they took over a program, to run the program the way they felt best, and to be able to redesign it and shape it to meet the needs of their community. And that was the self-governance demonstration project. I represented many tribes who took part in that demonstration project, and eventually it became a permanent part of the law in Title V. And it says there are 330 tribes. There are actually now over 350 tribes taking part. Just last month, another one of the partners of the Sonosky firm and I worked with 2 tribes in Michigan who joined self-governance. And Colin has worked with some tribes in Nevada recently that joined self-governance. This is a very significant program, and we will be talking more about those numbers of tribes. This all comes from, and I should say that these findings, these 1975 findings, yeah, thanks. These findings are really fundamental to a change in Indian policy, and you, more than most tribes I work with in the country, have lived through and know those policies in your lives and in your families' lives of war and domination and treaties that weren't kept and removal, all of those things, assimilation, all of these processes that the federal government went through in its relationship with Indian people and Indian tribes. In the 70s, during the Nixon administration, there was a dramatic shift in focus, and the Self-Determination Act was enacted, and the findings were that the federal domination, prolonged federal domination of Indian service programs has served to retard rather than enhance the progress of Indian people in their communities. And it's denied Indian people the voice they should have in their own programs. I think probably few of you would disagree that that's been the case. Even if you feel like you should get your services from Indian Health Service, it is still true that that federal domination was a fact then, and in some cases is still a fact. So the intention was to create an opportunity for tribes to exercise the voice and authority that they inherently have to carry out programs, and so they put it in statute so that the federal agencies would have to pay attention to it. The self-governance findings in 2000, so this is a quarter of a century later, 25 years. So when I say it is a quarter of a century, it seems like a really long time, and when I think about the fact that 1975, I think about what I was doing, and then I think about 2000, it seems like hardly any time at all, maybe a reflection of my age. But here, there's an acknowledgement that there had been considerable strides in improving Indian health care, possibly not as well reflected in the Great Plains as in other parts of the country, but that it still had failed to meet the trust responsibilities of the federal government and to satisfy its obligations to Indian tribes under its treaties and other laws. And Congress found again that transferring full control and funding to tribes upon your request, not forcing it, but upon request, over decision-making and funding is an appropriate and effective means of implementing the federal policy of government-to-government relationships with tribes. So these statements really reflect the backdrop of self-determination and self-governance. But for people who've had treaties that weren't lived up to, promises over and over, the fact of nice statements is not necessarily reassuring, but in some senses we have to work with what we have. And that at least is the policy. And we see some evidence in what's happened in self-determination, self-governance, that in fact it has played out more effectively than anyone might have hoped in some respects. But there are remaining lots of questions, and a lot of those questions were asked most clearly and continued most strongly among the tribes in North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, the Great Plains, the Billings area, sometimes the Navajo area. And these questions are really fundamental, and it's important they be asked and they be answered. Among those questions is, does self-determination affect the trust responsibility? And so you'll see on your PowerPoint that there's on the left side what Title I says, that's, remember, self-determination, and on the right side what Title V says, self-governance. And what you see when you read both of them is that the answer to this, at least insofar as Congress has enacted it in law, is no. The trust responsibility has not been impaired. And the statements are unequivocal that each agreement has to be consistent with the federal government's trust responsibility, treaty obligations, and the government-to-government relationship between tribes and the United States. Now, can Congress ignore that sometimes? Can the agency ignore it sometimes? Well, of course, we know that things happen, and sometimes they do, but as a matter of law, this is the commitment that is made. It's as good as you get. And the Secretary is prohibited from waiving, modifying, or diminishing that trust responsibility in any respect through these documents. And each compact and funding, and we'll talk about those later, has these statements in them as part, not only part of the law, but as part of the agreement that the Secretary of Health and Human Services through the Indian Health Service Director signs, making these commitments. The next question that is asked routinely and is so important is, will our tribe lose tribal sovereignty? And again, the answer is no. And this we see in practice routinely. The statements in both Title I and Title V, nothing in this act shall be construed as affecting, modifying, diminishing, or otherwise impairing the sovereign immunity from suit enjoyed by an Indian tribe, or authorizing or requiring the termination of any existing trust responsibility of the United States with respect to Indian people. That's as clear a statement as you can find in law, and it appears in every funding agreement, compact or funding agreement, the same commitment. Now, tribes sometimes choose to waive sovereign immunity for a limited purpose, but that is your self-governing right that the tribe has when it serves the tribe's interests. But nothing in this agreement, nothing that would arise out of the exercise of self-determination and self-governance leads to that result. Some people ask, is self-governance fair? There was a lot of suspicion about self-governance, particularly out of this area. Your former chairman spoke at a meeting, the first meeting I attended in the Great Plains, where he talked about the history where the tribes here made a pact that no one would go into self-governance. in the early days in 1994, 95, that they weren't sure what it would do. But he also spoke about the fact that by the time this was occurring in 2015, hundreds of tribes, more than 300 tribes by then, were taking part in self-governance, and the evidence was overwhelming that they were doing well and managing well. But it was important throughout the process of self-determination, self-governance, to be sure that tribes would be treated equally. And in the self-governance and self-determination process, there are provisions that make sure that funding is allocated to tribes the same way, whether they are being served by the Indian Health Service, being served by their tribe under Title I, or being served by their tribe under Title V under self-governance. There are no differences. When more than one tribe, and we'll talk about this more, it's an issue in this area, in this service unit, if more than one tribe benefits from the same program in the service unit, such as the Winnebago and Omaha tribes relying on inpatient and emergency department services, then the program must be divided. The process is the same in Title I or Title V. The law is clear. You can't use divisibility, failure, inability to divide it as a basis for saying, no, it has to stay with IHS. But the money can be divided and the program can be divided so that both tribes are fairly treated. But no tribe is prevented from moving forward as it chooses to move forward to meet the needs of its community. Those are the privileges and the rights of tribes who are self-governing. So it's fair and it's even, but what about the differences between Title I and Title V, self-determination and self-governance? And what I argue, and I believe it is really almost hard to contradict, is that everything in self-governance is a little easier than in self-determination, those two parts of the law. Remember, the first was earlier adopted. It has still lots of rules. It has a model contract. It has things that have to be done a certain way that IHS has significant control over. Those are not true under self-governance. So some of the things, there are some planning grants available for self-governance, and in fact, your tribe applied for one, was granted it, used it to begin this process. The process has been much longer and much more detailed even than that planning grant could support, but that's not available in Title I. No proposal needs to be written or approved by IHS. So under Title I, it's kind of like you make your case for why you should be allowed to take over a program, and you describe everything you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and what your standards are going to be, and so on, and then IHS has to approve it. In Title V, you do your own planning. You do your own decision-making, and then develop a compact and funding agreement and provide them to IHS, and you begin negotiating for those. That saves significantly, and it shifts the control from IHS to the tribe. The tribe is in control of the document, in a sense, and the negotiation, not the Indian Health Service. You're not bound by most IHS regulations in Title V. In both, you're not bound by IHS manuals and other things unless you've agreed to them. But under self-governance, you're free of most regulations. There are some exceptions. In self-governance, the compact is indefinite. It's more like a treaty than an ordinary agreement in that once you enter into it, it stays forever unless you choose to amend it. The funding agreement has an end date on it, but the big difference between it and Title I is in Title I, if you don't submit the next round of paperwork and IHS doesn't agree to it by the end of the fiscal year, at the beginning of the next fiscal year, they don't send you any money. They hold up the money until you've entered into the agreement. So they have a lot of power. They can twist arms pretty well with tribes to say, well, we want you to agree to this, and until you do, we're not giving you the money. We're not signing this agreement. Now, eventually you could appeal that and so on, but all that time you're doing without resources from the Indian Health Service. Under self-governance, and this is one of the values of self-governance having been, the law having been written and introduced in Congress and passed after the experience of self-determination, in self-governance, once you have a funding agreement, even if it expires, if you don't get around to negotiating, or you get in a quarrel with IHS over the terms and you can't reach agreement, you don't sign it, you just do nothing. You can do nothing, or you can walk out of the negotiation, or however it ends. IHS must continue to fund you exactly as it would have had you continued your funding agreement, including any increases. You get everything you would have gotten had you had a renewed agreement. You don't have, or some changes you might have wanted, but you continue to receive funds. It takes away the ability of IHS to manipulate or to pressure tribes that they have when they can control when you get funding. Under this, they don't have that control. And another that seems really subtle, but it's actually really important to tribes, and that is that you can redesign the program. Yes. Oh, before I move on, sorry. They're trying to interrupt me. You may notice that I get on a roll. That's kind of a challenge.
So before we move to the next slide, we have a few questions that are related to program redesign, so we thought it would be appropriate to ask these questions now. First one is, has the Winnebago tribe considered closing the ER and inpatient departments and concentrating on the various other departments? And related to that same question is the inpatient department being closed?
To my knowledge, so first of all, as a matter of law, if a tribe takes over a hospital and it wants to close units and open other units, or move the money to contract health or purchase referred care now, or it wanted to move it to prevention services or early intervention, any of those things, as a matter of law, it can. What I started to say is that my experience, and this is truly experience all over the country, is that tribes move very slowly in making any dramatic changes in their program while they come to fully understand it, engage with their community to see what works best for their community. If you close inpatient and emergency department, you've essentially closed the hospital and become a large outpatient clinic. The fact is that many people we've talked to have expressed their concern that is a risk. That's, if IHS continues to operate it, that's what they've done or are in the process of doing. They've given notice. That's what they intend to do with Susan in Rapid City Service Unit, which was a hospital, and they've given notice to Congress. They intend to close the hospital. The Winnebago tribe has not done anything of the sort. Legal authority may be there, but there's nothing that suggests that would happen. Certainly no plan to do it, nothing to suggest that would be a direction. What I've heard most is what we want to do is make sure we can get a well-running hospital, including inpatient and emergency department, that are safe and high quality, that will meet all of the federal standards, so that Medicare and Medicaid will pay for those services and ensure that our people, all of you, can get the best care, the care you deserve to get when you go into a hospital at the Omaha Winnebago Hospital. So I think the answer is you can, but you probably won't. Anything else on that one?
The next question is, will IHS have any affiliation with Aberdeen or Rockville, such as asking for guidance with hospital issues?
Will IHS have that, or it says IHS,
Oh,
but
WIHS, so Winnebago IHS, so the hospital. Mm-hmm.
Yes, if the Winnebago tribe, once it takes over, wants to engage with the area or headquarters to get assistance in its program, that remains available to it. A variety of means under which that can be made available, it's available. In this case, from all the planning and implementation work that I've observed and am part of, I think the expectation is that every effort is being made to learn everything the committee can, and we're, as Colin and I are working on the same thing with the tribe, learn everything we can about the way the area and headquarters have related to this hospital, the things they've done, the efforts they've made to try to learn from them and improve on them. But we know that this area office has gone through, it still has an acting area director, it has gone through many, it has a kind of almost revolving door of staffing. So there's not a lot of expertise there to rely on right now. In headquarters, there's somewhat more, but it will remain available. I think it won't be necessarily the first source of information, first new source, so we're going to have a ton of that information already. So I came out Sunday. Colin and I drove out from we drove out together from Omaha, intending that thinking there would be negotiations with IHS this week, but because of the government shutdown and then the storm, they were postponed till next week. So I'm staying over. I'm going to be here all weekend. I will have in my room the boxes of notebooks of documents that the tribe has received from Indian Health Service in response to sets of questions it began sending in the middle of 2015 in order that it would have all the information it could. And so we're continually going through that to make the best use of what we can learn from them. The chairman assigned Colin to make sure that I didn't run over. So I have to keep moving, or else Colin might start throwing spitwads at me. There are some other things about the differences between Title I and Title V self-governance. And they are, in both of them, question is what kind of monitoring. IHS, each tribe, and either one, tribes have to provide a single audit. They have to do that every year. But in Title I, there have to be quarterly financial reports, annual program reports, annual site visits from IHS. In Title V, none of those things are required. So work that goes on to satisfy IHS so it can review these things is work you don't have to do that can then, as energies and the costs, can be devoted to doing a better job, to being more forward-thinking, to evaluate better actual program operations and go forward. Are other tribes affected? So I referred to that a little before in the question about whether self-governance, self-determination are fair. One to the next. Under both Title I and Title V, will other tribes be affected in terms of the amount of funding available to them? The answer is no. Self-governance tribes often take more shares of the area office. That's a piece of funding you're entitled to get because service units, hospitals, are supported by activities that occur at area and by activities that occur in headquarters and then actually in the secretary and other departments of the federal government. And there are shares that tribes can take. Typically, IHS has simply, they hand you a table, but they do nothing to advise much about what would be reasonable for a tribe to choose to take and have to control and use for themselves to carry out their program. Title V, as tribes become much more aware of the way the programs work and consider in their planning process the assumption, self-governance tribes tend to take more of those shares in order to make better use of them in the administration of their own program. Tribes who carry out their own program, whether you're Title I or V, you get contract support cost funding. And since about 4 years ago when the Supreme Court ruled that they must actually pay contract support costs, that becomes a real resource for helping to support the infrastructure, finance and HR and all the other pieces that are needed to run a healthy, strong program. But you can do it in a way that is very supportive of your own health program as opposed to the way it plays out often in Indian Health Service in those programs. Tribes carry out their programs often have more experts working for them, and that's already part of what the Winnebago tribe is engaged in. They have already hired consultants, and they have, and I'll talk more about this later, but they've already identified new positions that they want to bring on well before they take over the hospital so that they can have those people providing assistance to them to get ready so that on the day they take over the hospital and the clinic programs, because it's not just the hospital, it's also the clinic programs there, they are hitting the ground running. They are ready to go with people who are ready to accept leadership and carry out a program supporting the Indian Health Service employees who are already there. And you notice, I said these are leaders, but they're supporting the employees. The people who provide patient care, the people who work on the ground in a hospital, those are the most important people, or in a health clinic. Those are the most important people in the quality of care. But they often can't do the best job unless they get the best support. So the tribe is working to be sure that they will have the best support. But that expertise is used not only in the day-to-day administration and planning for your own program, it also allows you to be more expert in engagement with Congress, with federal agencies, with other tribes. When policy decisions, allocation decisions, and so on are being made, you're in the best position. Tribes that are carrying out their own programs have people who know about stuff. When you are, IHS is running it, and you're the beneficiary of it, you have lots of smart people working for you, but you don't necessarily have anyone who understands healthcare policy and the details of Medicare reimbursement and how to make the most of it. Self-governance tribes tend to have that and bring it to bear, something we would expect the Winnebago tribe to be increasingly involved in. Ms. Kitchen, from the council member Kitchen, is very involved already in some national committees that are engaged in trying to affect Indian policy as it supports Indian health programs. And then finally, self-governance tribes work together. There's a National Tribal Self-Governance Advisory Committee. There are national conferences on self-governance, and those tribes are active in trying to shape their own future and their own agenda across all the programs. Yes?
The question is, what will Trump policies do to Medicare, Medicaid, and the federal budget?
I don't know. I don't sure any of us know for sure what the president's ultimate objectives are with regard to certain programs. The Medicaid program is intact so far. He is certainly, his administration is advocating for some changes that would allow states, for instance, to impose work requirements as a condition of getting Medicaid. Tribes are pushing back and saying that Indian health programs, IHS and tribal, should be exempt from those policies. In Medicare, the president in his campaign said there would be no changes to Medicare, that he fully supported it. It's less clear what the budget decisions that have been made in terms of the, in the recent Tax Act and the very large decision about savings that they're going to make, reduction in tax recovery, may due to the budget and how that will affect those programs. But you'll be part of, I suspect, a cadre of people from around the country, from other health providers and patient advocacy groups and so on, to try to inform the administration and the Congress about the special relationship, to remind them of the special relationship with tribes, and to encourage them to not make changes in those programs that are detrimental. Today, one of those is really a live issue, I should mention. The Special Diabetes Initiative, it's been funded for now almost a decade, I think, has not been reauthorized. It was extended in the previous CR continuing resolution until March, but it was not included for permanent for a lengthy reauthorization, 3-6 years, in the last continuing resolution. And there's great concern on the part of Indian people all over the country about the need to inform Congress and the White House about how critical the Special Diabetes Project is for meeting the needs of Indian people who experience diabetes at a rate much higher than other people. So if however you feel about self-governance, make your voice heard about SDPI to the members of your delegation and to others about how important that program is. So we don't know for sure. What I do know, and we'll talk about, is there are protections in the law about funding, and we'll talk about them in a minute.
Myra, we have a related question, which is, what is the process in funding and budgeting for our needs, and who is responsible for presenting it to the authority? The President's Office, Office of Management and Budget, Congress, what role does IHS have in this process?
Okay, the quick version is you as advocates and your tribe communicate to federal agencies, and because you can communicate with the Congress directly, you're not beholden on the administration to communicate with them, you can communicate directly with the White House, you can communicate your budget needs. In terms of what actually the day-to-day process, the Indian Health Service has for a couple decades held budget consultations annually, in which it asks tribes all over the country to submit their priorities for budgeting, and it rolls them together, those get rolled together to come up with a national tribal consensus about what the priorities should be. Those get communicated to the Indian Health Service, which then looks at them and puts them into its budget proposal to the at the department level, the Department of Health and Human Services. Typically that tends to squash them. A bunch of things that were tribal priorities drop out, or the amounts are not there, because each part of a department is being given instructions from the beginning about what they can have, kind of caps on what they can ask for, which is why the individual tribal advocacy is so critical, because however clear your words are through the IHS system, they don't always get to the people who need them. From the department, the budget then goes to the Office of Management and Budget, which consolidates the budgets, the proposals from all agencies, and develops a budget which is announced by the president. In that process, the agency, IHS, and the department and OMB are not allowed to comment about that budget until it is presented by the president through the Office of Management and Budget to the Congress. However, there is a long history of presidents who propose cuts or increases to the Indian Health Service budget, which the Congress then ignores in favor of putting its own budget stamp on it, and typically that's been favorable for Indian tribes. Tribes have many friends in Congress, not as many as there need to be, but there's been support. There needs to be way more support. Who's taking part in self-governance? If I were joining a new club, I'd want to know who the members were. And I think in some respects that's what the leadership here in the 90s was looking at as well. You know, self-governance is really new. How much do we have in common with those tribes that are doing? A lot of the early adopters were in the Northwest, really small tribes, depend on fishing and other things, small population, small land base. And they look around in the plains and said, well, they don't look they don't have the same concerns and issues we have. But that experience has changed. Currently, first of all, who can take part? Any tribe that has 3 years of clean audits and has completed planning, and Winnebago tribe has satisfied both of those requirements. Who is actually taking part now? There are 225 tribes doing in the self-determination Title I program, including your tribe is one of those. There are more than 350 tribes throughout the United States who are taking part in self-governance. Some of them have taken just small parts of their program, some have taken all of it. Very significant number of the hospitals in the Indian Health system, Indian Health Service system, are now being operated by tribes. If the Winnebago tribe takes over the Omaha Winnebago Hospital, it will be the first tribe in the Great Plains running a hospital under self-governance. Spirit Lake is already taking part in self-governance, running its clinic program. So you're in very good company everywhere in the country. Navajo is taking part in self-governance for the operation of more than one of its hospitals and clinics. Tribes in Oklahoma, many of them have taken over their programs, and throughout the United States. And in the Alaska area, through tribal organizations, because the tribes are very small, they came together as tribal organizations, they actually have taken over virtually the entire Indian health system in self-governance. A couple of tribes remain in a Title I agreement, but they banded together and they also run the entire area office. They took over the area office. All that's left there is a little bit of residual function. It went from multi-story building and other buildings to one floor of one building. And that's the Indian Health Service presence in Alaska now, while the tribes have taken over everything. Yes?
question here about the number of treaty tribes who currently operate under self-governance.
Oh, I apologize. I don't know. We could get you the names of all the tribes and you might recognize which ones are treaty tribes. What I can tell you with absolute certainty is there are many of them that have treaties. And I know that because they've told me they had treaties. But I can't recite to you what number. The majority of tribes in the country don't have treaties. And there are over 200 tribes in Alaska. Half the tribes in the country are in Alaska. And as a result of the way in which the Alaska was acquired, and then later the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, there was a settlement act, but there were no treaties. And there are many tribes that were not offered the opportunity to have a treaty. I was at a meeting early on in discussions of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act amendments in the late 90s. And Senator Inouye, now deceased, from Hawaii, an enormous advocate of Indian health programs and Indian tribes, he spoke to the assembly of over 200 or 300 people, and his comment was that of all the treaties, only half had ever been ratified, and of those, none had been lived up to in their entirety. The treaties are incredibly important, not just historically, but in present day. But what has happened over the years is the gains and the commitments that the tribes with treaties obtained have been extended in many respects through law, through executive orders, through statutes, through recognition in various laws and court decisions as rights of tribes and of obligations of the federal government to tribes. It doesn't diminish the responsibilities under your treaty or others, but it is, so bottom line is I don't know the answer, and I think that it may be less important for this discussion than it seems, which is not to diminish its importance. Are you waving your pen? We're trying not to because, as I said, the chairman told me I had to get done, and there's a ball game at 8 o'clock. I'm told we had to get done, but I'll take an occasional question from the floor if it feels really urgent to you. So if you have one, I'll take it.
I do have several questions, but I didn't want to interrupt.
Could we do this? If you're able to be here, could you keep those questions, and at the end, there will be time for questions if they haven't already been addressed. Would it be okay to wait?
These questions are related to this budget process.
Let's wait, because there's going to be a whole discussion about money later in this presentation. The comment was it relates to budget. Let me talk about money, and then at the end, let's go back to your questions about budget, which are in many ways not specific to self-governance. They are specific to they're general to Indian policy. So I'm going to keep moving, but I am going to make sure that I come back to you at the end. You get to be first up in the questions at the end. So I talked about how many tribes, and then what are the options? You can take over a little bit of a program. You've already done that. You run your EMS program and dental and some other pieces. That's much more than a teeny part. One tribe I represent now in self-governance, when it had its Title I contract, it had a half-time community health representative type person. And now it has a clinic with a mid-level provider. But they started with that little tiny program. Or you can take over everything Indian Health Service does except inherent federal functions, which means something only a federal official can do, or residual dollar, and that's referring to funding. That's the funding IHS needs in order to carry out the inherent federal functions. And the tribe chooses that. What does the tribe get if it proceeds? So this is taking us to money. Yes.
Before we move to the discussion about money, we have a related question with the subject that Myra was just talking about. And the question is, what are we trying to self-govern? Is it the hospital, clinic, a first aid station, or just parts of the health unit?
The plan for the tribe at this time, and no decision is final in self-governance until you sign the final documents. But the planning process and what we anticipate will be negotiated will be the assumption of all functions of the Winnebago Service Unit. So not just pieces. If somehow those fell apart, the tribe could choose to take over only the clinic. The Omaha tribe years ago took over its clinic operations and carries it out at Carl T. Curtis Health Clinic, and it could take over many other pieces, a contract health program or pharmacy. There are a variety of things it could do without taking everything. There are some pieces that the tribe gets from IHS that work really well. The sanitation projects, IHS continues to do that. The tribe then, through a separate process, does work on them. That works well. It's unlikely they would take that over. But right now the planning is going forward for taking everything. Okay, where am I? So what do you get if you proceed? So I went too far here. Let me go back. So you get what is referred to as the 106A amount. This is the reference in the Self-Determination Act to the law, Public Law 93-638. And what it means is that the IHS must make available to you, the administration, the Health and Human Services, must make available to the tribe not less than what the Secretary would have otherwise provided for operation, without regard to the organizational level within IHS, including contractable, supportive administrative functions, but you only get your share. So that means you get 100% of the clinic functions, because those are what is left here for Winnebago tribe. That's part of the Winnebago Service Unit, and as I said, the Omaha tribe has already taken its program for that. Inpatient and ED, we know that the Omaha tribe has a continuing interest in that, and so the Winnebago tribe has a certain portion, and the Omaha tribe has a certain portion. That has yet to be decided upon, figured out, and ultimately IHS makes those decisions, and IHS has a right. Then each side can appeal that if they don't agree with that decision. Plus, you get contract support costs that cover direct program expenses for the operation, indirect to cover shared overhead. So if you have a finance department and they manage things in your roads department and your police department, or whatever the departments are, and health, and it covers those finance things, and so on. Some pre-award costs, so it costs money to plan and negotiate to assume a program. And under the law, these are allowable contract support costs that can be recovered by the tribe, and startup costs. Certain costs, one time only, necessary to take over the program can be recovered as well. The big piece of this that's so important is that once the 106A amount is established and paid, it cannot be reduced. As a matter of law, it cannot be reduced unless Congress reduces the appropriation. It's set. So I said earlier there were some protections even about the budget. Unless Congress goes through and says, well, we're going to do 10% less for hospital and clinics or whatever, then there can be no reduction. I just can't decide to give you less. In addition, you get, what else do you get? That question's a little out of order. Oh, I went the wrong direction, that's why. You also get revenue. So tribes, and IHS too, but tribes have consistently obtained more revenue than IHS as they carry out their program. You can get Medicare and Medicaid. The restriction right now on Medicare revenue and Medicaid revenue for inpatient and emergency department is so long as the hospital has been decertified. Until it can meet the standards for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for a hospital, you're not eligible for that money, for those payments. But you are still getting Medicaid revenue for the clinic operations and some other pieces, and when the hospital is recertified, which we're confident the tribe would be able to achieve, then the full Medicare and Medicaid. Children's health insurance program also available. That was just reauthorized for another 6 years to enormous relief. Many moms and their children benefit from that program. Medicare Part B, outpatient clinic services and pharmacy. in Part D from Medicare. Third-party revenue, that's private, that's insurance, basically anyone who has any kind of insurance. And then the Veterans Health Administration and Department of Defense must pay Indian health programs for the services you provide to Indian people who are veterans, who are qualified for veterans benefits. Again, you can't get this one until for hospital services until the hospital is recertified, because the Veterans Administration ties its qualifications to Medicare. But all of that revenue, in many Indian health programs, those sources of revenue make up more than half of the budget of an Indian health program. In some cases, it doubles or more than doubles the total budget. So it's an extremely important part of the resources. And tribes are entitled to have those funds and keep them. They can't be taken by IHS, and they cannot be considered by IHS when it's determining how much funds to get, how much money you're entitled to. So if you increase your third-party revenue, IHS can't say, oh, well, they need less appropriated dollars. They don't need as much money from us, from the 106A amount, because they have all this revenue. They can't do that. That money is yours, and you get to use it, you get to carry it over, and you can use it for anything in your tribe that benefits a health program. We'll talk a little about that later. You also get savings. There are opportunities in federal law available to tribes that allow savings to be achieved using special rates you're entitled to, avoiding premiums and cost sharing in Medicaid that other people are responsible for, but Indian people who are not. The right to purchase certain health coverage. I think Winnebago tribe is self-insured. Some tribes have taken advantage of the federal employee health benefit plan and found savings. Others didn't find savings and so didn't do that. And the fact that Indian health programs are the payer of last resort. So if there's any other payer out there, they can't, the provider of care can't come and demand payment from an Indian health program until it's exhausted every other payment source. And then there's these others. So I mentioned premiums and cost sharing and a few other kinds of things that are there. And there are other pieces. There were provisions in law for managing Medicaid and gave special protections to Indian health programs, and also requiring states to consult with tribes. This came out of federal law requiring states to consult with tribes about Medicaid. Tribes that are participating in self-governance, self-determination tend to be much more effective and active in those negotiations and get better results in their interaction with states because it benefits the state. And then a formalization of the Tribal Technical Advisor Group to Centers for Medicare Services, Medicaid Services, so that tribes have a seat at the table to discuss Indian issues. There are also some things that save you some money. Tribal employees, people who work for the tribe, who are health professionals, don't have to get a license in the state where they are, so they wouldn't have to have a Nebraska or Iowa license, so long as they have a license somewhere in the country and they act within the scope of their license. And the federal government, and we think other payers can't discriminate because you're not required to obtain a license from the state to carry out programs, and there's some exemption from fees. These are all things that were put in the Healthcare Improvement Act or other laws to ensure that tribal programs had the same benefits Indian health service programs had. And there's more. You can get, and I know there are employees here, I'm sure employees are wondering about this, and I think there may be some questions. Federal employees may be assigned to work for the tribe and to have those federal employees have the right to receive benefits. The Winnebago tribe, I think over 2 years ago, enacted a resolution saying it would make available, it would offer IPA's Intergovernmental Personnel Act agreements for civil service employees, or MOA's Memorandum of Agreement to Commission Corps officers who were employed at IHS at the time they took over the program. They would offer them positions if they were eligible, and IHS has certain eligibility standards. The tribe has some. They would offer them either an IPA or an MOA, or if the individual was interested, they'd offer them direct hire. It is absolutely essential for good programs to have stability in their healthcare staff. And one of the incredible sad things about what has happened at the service unit is it's had constant turnover in its the CEO at the hospital, in the what would be a hospital administrator anywhere else, and that has led to constant turnover in staff. And the IHS is relying on contractors to staff the whole emergency department and others, and those folks do not have a permanent billet here. This isn't where they've decided to make their home and provide services. Achieving stability is critical, so the place to start with that, and the tribe and the council have recognized that, is to start with the employees who are already there and to welcome them to be part of carrying out the program for the benefit of everyone. So that's a very important feature, but it also allows those employees who committed their lives to working for Indian Health Service to federal employment, have benefits there, may not want to change that program. They want to continue that to be able to do it. Access, I'm sorry? I'll bet.
So I'm going to try to combine a few of
Okay,
them.
good.
So one question is, would the tribe still have Commission Corps officers working here? Currently, pharmacy, HIM, PTOT, nursing, admin, PHNs have Corps officers on staff. A related question, how long is a government worker able to stay government? How long, that is, how long does an IPA last? Is the tribal council going to come over to the hospital and talk to the employees?
Okay, leave those with me for a moment.
And then I have a few more sort of direct hire type questions.
Okay, I'm going to take these in order. Would there still be IHS Commission Corps officers, actually Public Health Service Commission Corps officers, working at the hospital after assumption and in these programs? My answer is almost certainly yes. Commission Corps officers are essentially treated like military. If the tribe wants them to stay, and the tribe has said, we want you to stay, so long as you meet the eligibility standards, we want you to stay, they do not have a choice. Now, the tribe does not want to have an employee who says, oh my God, if the IHS makes me stay, I'll have to stay, I guess, but I don't want to be here, I want to go somewhere else. Nobody wants an employee who doesn't want to be in the program. But if the employee, if that Commission Corps officer wants to stay, meets the basic eligibility qualifications, I expect you're going to see them the day before and the day after and as many years after that as they want to be there. So then the question, how long is a government worker able to stay with the government? How long does an IPA last? Typically, IPAs are written for 3 years. In Alaska, they just extended them indefinitely. They have people working under IPA at the Alaska Native Medical Center who came over when the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium took over the hospital in 1997. So that's 20 years. They're still working under an IPA. And there are people in the Commission Corps still there. That really is the choice of the individual employee and the tribe. I do not think IHS has the right to say we won't sign off on the IPA so long as the employee maintains the eligibility standards, which really means getting a positive PMAP, which is some sort of performance evaluation. And then the last question is the tribal council going to come over to the hospital to talk to the employees? The tribal council has been asking the IHS to allow it to come and hold a meeting with all the employees for over 2 years. And IHS keeps saying, well, you know, we got to wait till it's sooner, we got to wait till it's closer, got to be sure you're really serious. IHS is here next week for negotiations. We're going to raise that again, insisting that they allow those interactions to begin to happen directly with large employee groups, with IHS and the tribe present, so every employee can be well informed about their rights, the tribe, what the tribe is offering, the environment that you'd be coming into when the tribe takes over the program. So yes, they've been trying, and we'll keep on doing that. Sure.
The question goes, people are the key to good health care. If you keep all the staff, where is the better health care? Also, will the hospital still use contractors such as in the lab, radiology, and ER? If IHS cannot hire professional staff, what makes the tribe think they can when they rely on federal employees? That's a related question, I think.
Okay, leave that one too. I want to remember them, all three, get them in order here. So, it is absolutely right. I think I said this just a minute ago. People are the key to health care. There's no doubt about it. And the assumption here, it says if you keep all the staff, how will it get better? Where is it better? The assumption is that the staff is the cause of the failure to be certified. We don't accept that premise. At the hospital, in any health program, I know, I ran a Department of Health and Social Services, and that included a large psychiatric hospital and some other care facilities. There are people who work there who may not be the best employee. But among the staff in every setting, and that's true of every Indian Health Service setting I've ever been and have worked with, there are many people, the majority, who are committed and good staff people. But what all healthcare staff need is good leadership and consistent leadership. And opportunities for training, the opportunity to, when a problem happens, to have somebody notice it immediately, take it seriously, respond to it. That doesn't mean firing people. It doesn't even mean disciplining them sometimes. It means helping them see what went wrong, helping to check all the systems and make sure the improvements are made. So I believe you keep every IHS staff person you possibly can. That's what the council is committed to, if they're eligible. And you add in additional staff as needed, but you provide consistent leadership. Will the hospital still use contractors such as in the lab, radiology, and ER? It'll almost have to. There's almost no doubt it will. Virtually every hospital in the country uses some contractors to carry out certain functions. Recruitment in healthcare is a challenge everywhere. Big cities, little cities, rural areas, urban areas. It's a problem. There are not as many healthcare providers and as many healthcare technicians as are needed. Yes, there'll be some, but nothing like, within a year, I would wager, it'll be nothing like what it has been with IHS in the past 3 or 4 or 5 years here, where I think the lack of consistent leadership, the lack of vision, has impaired the ability to recruit people and get them to be willing to commit to be here. People don't commit, health professionals don't particularly want to come to work in a hospital that's been decertified. But when the tribe takes it over, it will be starting new, and it will be committed to getting certified. It will not be the same leadership it was before, and we think that the tribe will be successful in recruitment. You know, I live in Alaska. Tribes in Barrow, on the edge of the Arctic Ocean, on a plain as flat as anything around here, and a heck of a lot colder, a lot longer time of the year, never getting really warm in the summer, are able to recruit doctors and nurses and other health professionals, to recruit people to work in their finance department and billing office and so on. They can do it, you can do it. This is a beautiful place. People fundamentally want to know who they're going to work for, though, and they want to know that they're going to be taken seriously and treated well. We believe the tribe can do that. That's what tribes all around the country have experienced. It's not easy. It's a heck of a lot of work, but it is possible. But you have to be patient. I don't want to oversell. You have to be patient, and there will be times when there's a lull, and there'll be times when there's a peak. All of you can contribute to that by being welcoming to people who come to work, who are being interviewed, and to help ensure the success. So that was the question. If IHS can't recruit them, why do we think the tribe can? I think it almost answers itself. I think we counted yesterday or the day before, there have been 13 acting CEOs, or CEOs. A couple of them were permanent. At least one of them had to leave for reasons unrelated to wanting to be in the job. But let's say there have been 10 acting people in 3 years. Nobody wants to come and work in that environment. That is something that tribe expects to be able to change. I have every reason to think they can based on past experience. Tribe's notorious for hiring unqualified people, and we don't see a change in better health care if that happens. The tribe is making decisions to, first of all, I'll leave to all of you your judgments about that. I won't comment on it. It's not my community and so on. So I don't know how true that is or not. What I do know is the council is sensitive to the perception of that and sensitive to the importance of making sure that hiring decisions are done professionally and thoughtfully. And it has created a Winnebago comprehensive health care system with a board. That board will direct an executive director and other staff who will be responsible for hiring and firing. That will not be principally will almost never a council function. To try to create a little bit of that insulation, one hopes would be there. And as much as anything, that's to avoid a perception of the kind of perception that's embedded in that question. Yes? Does this count against my time? Okay.
So related to MOAs and IPAs, is it true that there's a list of people who can keep their jobs or be let go? And how will the tribe choose which medical, nursing, lab, and x-ray staff will be offered MOAs or MOUs to stay on staff? And how will these positions be filled when the employee leaves?
Okay, I think I've actually answered these, so I'm going to try to be short, although as the chairman lets me know regularly and correctly, I never answer anything very quickly. But is it true there's a list of people who can keep their IPA, keep their jobs, or be let go? No, today, as far as I know, there is no such, I'm positive there is no such list. We just had a discussion with the Indian Health Service agency lead negotiator for this. We said, where's your list? Because the tribe cannot offer an IPA or MOA to anyone that IHS says does not have an acceptable performance evaluation, and then there's some other limitations. They are supposed to be finishing those evaluations. We hope by sometime in February we'll know, and every employee can talk to their HR folks about do I qualify for an IPA or an MOA, and in turn can talk to the tribe about whether you qualify for direct hire if for some reason IHS wouldn't agree to an IPA or an MOA. And then the second part of that question would be, how will you choose? I think I've said over and over, the tribe has committed. Everyone who qualifies will be offered an IPA or an MOA. It then is up to the employee whether they want to exercise that decision or not. And if they don't want to be a continuous federal employee, but may want to come and work directly for the tribe, then that remains an option for them as well.
A couple more HR questions. One is related to training, whether the tribes served by the hospital, I assume the Winnebago and Omaha tribes if their tribal members are trained for professional and paraprofessional hospital positions, and what steps is the tribe taking to ensure that the positions can be successfully filled in the various offices? I think this is sort of a transition question related to transition, training, education, internships, mentorships at IHS, and then a question about tribal preference. Will Winnebagos be granted tribal preference, even those who have relinquished? And finally, a person who's not a tribal member, what job security, they're asking about the job security they might have. They're concerned about the lack thereof because they're not a tribal member.
Thanks. Oh wait, that's in the wrong order. What about training? There are two paths of activity going on right now, and both of them intensely. One of them is preparing for negotiations with Indian Health Service to be sure that we get the maximum resources available, that shares are calculated in a way that's fair to everyone who's affected by them, that all of these mechanical things that need to happen in a transition for healthcare programs do occur and in a timely, responsible way. But in the other track, it's all about operational things, and the first level of that is making sure that there are the right people in place at the assumption of the hospital and that piece of paper. So the tribe has already begun to advertise for some positions, and will be filling them, and this is all part of its pre-award activity to be sure that things are ready on day one. An executive director for the healthcare system, somebody to provide the leadership, a hospital administrator, somebody to get ready to step in on day one and to be part of all of the planning, a contract specialist to go through all the things that have to be done to make sure that all the PRC contracts, for instance, remain in place. There are no disruptions of services. The Xerox machines, or the copiers, I guess, they're not probably all Xerox, maybe none of them are. The copiers continue to be maintained. There are a million details, and they're working, so that person, a human resources staff specialist to be sure that there's somebody there who can help with all of these transitional pieces and who becomes extremely knowledgeable about the working with IHS employees who continue in federal employment. And then, of course, admin and self-governance coordinating people. And then there are other positions soon to be advertised, additional administrative positions. All of that's about making sure that the transition is orderly. But I also have been part of the conversations about as the tribe takes over, when it takes over time, and this is not an everything can be done at one time kind of promise, but the pieces here are to make sure that the hospital administrator and other key hospital staff are prepared to do the kind of training and support, mentorship that's needed inside the hospital for effective operations. And that over time, part of the redesign authority that exists is to look around and see, can the tribe offer its own training programs? There are Winnebagos who are working in significant healthcare positions, but there are not nearly enough Winnebago or Omaha people who are nurses and doctors and social workers and so on, healthcare professionals. That's a long-term piece. There aren't enough who are doing billing and coding, so you can maximize recovery. The Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium in Alaska is in the process of buying a college in order that it can offer training in all kinds of positions, technicians to work in the lab and radiology and other places, as well as billing and coding and nurse training and so on. There are opportunities, and the tribe has entered into agreements with the University of Nebraska Medical School in order to have them assist in consultation and in assisting them to plan for how to ensure an adequate workforce over time. Training health professionals is not something you do overnight. It's a process. But the tribe, I can tell you with confidence, the tribe is actively working on all of those pieces to be sure that it doesn't simply take over and run the same program that was always there, but instead is offering the hope of the improvements that can be made when you bring your own people in. Now, there were some very detailed questions here about tribal preference. The Indian Self-Determination Act has provisions for tribal preference. The precise details about how tribal preference is addressed here in terms of giving it to Winnebagos versus Omahas versus other tribes versus people who are non-Indian. These are things, frankly, they're outside my expertise. Someone else can talk to you about it. I think the HR people, when there are opportunities for more meetings, that will be a good time. There'll be lots of that. Good time to have more of that conversation. What I can tell you, though, that you should keep in mind when you think about that question is the resolution the council has already adopted. There are many Omaha tribal members working at the hospital for IHS. There are members of other tribes working there. It's not like only Winnebagos work there. They have offered continued employment to everyone who's eligible, regardless of whether they're Winnebago or Omaha. That's the commitment that's there. That's the commitment I anticipate remains in effect over time. It's having the right kind of health care providers who are knowledgeable of the community that everyone is making the commitment to. Okay, back to this PowerPoint before I really get in trouble. Responsibilities. The responsibilities in Title V are to carry out the program, but the tribe can choose to redesign. I just described one example of redesign, taking some money and putting it into doing more training than IHS ever imagined doing, supporting various kinds of activities, shifting focus in one way or another to improve services. The real issue in the responsibilities is when tribes take over under self-governance, self-determination too, but mostly under self-governance, is there's really nobody else left to blame. Now it is, the tribe has taken it over, this is their responsibility. The one out on this is there's always Congress. If it fails to provide adequate funding, or if the president requests too little funding and the Congress accepts that, they share the blame for whatever happens. Yes?
This is about FTCA coverage. Can the tribe be sued in the same way that IHS has been sued in
Oh, yes.
wrongful death claims?
Oh, good idea. Yes. So the question was, what about federal tort claims coverage? One of the benefits tribes get, I think it was back on an earlier slide, I may have gotten distracted by one of the questions, is to have the benefit of federal tort claims coverage. What that means is that the United States has waived sovereign immunity. It has sovereign immunity just like you do. It's waived it to allow itself to be sued when federal employees providing health care, this is just the one example, there are lots of, could give lots of others, there's a belief that they performed badly and someone was injured or killed as a result of that, the federal government says you can sue, the patient or his family can sue and recover for that. When tribes take over the program, federal law provides that so long as the conduct was by an employee working for the tribe, or with personal service contract, but they're working for the tribe, they're within the scope of their employment with the tribe. If the tribe is sued, that gets tendered to the United States through the Indian Health Service and the Department of Justice. They take over the lawsuit. The patient or family is protected to the same extent they would be if the IHS was still operating the facility, but the tribe doesn't have to take the money. If there isn't, ultimately there's an award. It doesn't come out of the tribe's resources. It comes out of the United States budget for federal tort claims. But patients are protected in the same way. What we hope, and what's generally true, is there are likely to be fewer claims over time, but in any healthcare program, malpractice can and does occur sometimes, and there needs to be a remedy, so there is still a remedy. More questions?
We have a few questions related to eligibility.
Yes. Go ahead.
Is it true that once the Winnebago tribe takes over the hospital, that only Winnebago tribal members will be served? And related to that, I am enrolled in the Omaha tribe of Nebraska. I would like to continue to use the hospital when I wish. Will this continue? And also, will the hospital continue to serve dependents of tribal members? And I take that to mean descendants, maybe who are not enrolled.
Okay, leave those here so I don't forget them. Okay, when a tribe takes over a program from Indian Health Service, it must serve the people. The one thing it can't do in an earlier slide, here it is right here, Title V. You may choose to redesign the program. You may not reduce eligibility. So, to the extent, what that ends up really meaning is, to the extent the tribe received funds from IHS to provide services for a certain population, then they must do that. The Omaha tribe has already taken over its clinic programs, and many Omahas, maybe some Winnebagos, go to the Carl T. Hastings clinic to get their services. Many of them are coming over to the hospital and using the clinic outpatient program there. Everything I hear is they're going to continue to be able to do that. There may be issues about reimbursement at some point depending on whether how the program develops, but in terms of the patient access to continue to receive services at the hospital, we think the answer is yes, as a general rule. Eligibility is a very complicated question, and there are sometimes shifts as time goes on, but the intention is to not make changes dramatically upon assumption of the hospital. There are still discussions going on with Omaha about between the two tribal councils about the relationship with regard to inpatient and emergency department services, and that might affect some of these pieces, but not in a way that we expect will affect the patients directly for the most part. So answer about Winnebago tribal members only, absolutely not. There are lots of tribal members from other tribes who use the hospital. I've just been looking at some utilization reports. That we know will continue. Will the tribe continue to serve dependents of tribal members, the descendants? We think yes, because that's that they are included in these tribal counts, and so the expectation is yes, that would be the case. If there are changes, if there are shifts, those will be things that you'll hear about. Those will be things that are adopted carefully and thoughtfully and well down the road. There's no way to know for sure. What I do know is the tribe cannot reduce eligibility without, as long as it took money for the patients. If it didn't get the money for the patients from IHS, then it may not, but they are receiving, the only funds that they may not receive would be if Omaha takes shares out for the inpatient and emergency department. Omaha already has its funds for clinic services, but as I said, those are programs. The stability is the watchword in transition, and that's what we expect to have happen. But I don't want to promise you, and I don't think the council or the administration could promise you absolutely no change, but I think anyone who's getting care at the hospital today who wants to continue to can count on the fact that they'll be able to continue afterwards. Okay, where am I? Are there risks to the tribe from taking over? Not as many as you think, because they can't reduce the amount of funding, and if there's not enough money, tribes can reduce the program. Ultimately, and this is sort of the fail-safe, although no tribe in the country has ever done this, not across a complete program, it can be given back to the Indian Health Service. So just as IHS has shifted its program around when it doesn't have sufficient funds, so may tribes have to do that sometimes. The expectation, this experience is, tribes are much more able to manage than IHS to avoid this sort of thing happening. Will the tribe have to spend its own money? Some folks worry that health programs are so big that they're just going to sort of be a sucking sound, taking resources away from other important governmental programs of the tribe. The answer is no. Tribes absolutely have no obligation to spend their own money. They must use their revenue, the third-party revenue from the hospital on those, or from the health program in health programs, but they don't have to add other funds, although some tribes, if they have enough resource, do. All revenues can be used to carry out and expand health services. What about other risks? You've been asking the questions. Employee recruitment or dissatisfaction. Sometimes people get unhappy and they leave. Facility adequacy, if the facility has problems, sometimes that is a considerable issue. System capacity, but you have quite a new facility. You have fewer capacity issues than other things. Patient dissatisfaction. One of the things tribes who take part in self-governance talk about a lot is that if they're going to be successful, they have to have happy employees. They have to have employees who are committed and want to be there. They have to make sure their facilities are up to date and as well as they can with the resources they have. They have to make them clean and well run, things where they belong when they belong there. They have to make sure that the waiting lines are not too long or unreasonable, out of the norm, that patients feel good about it. Many tribes have built-in satisfaction surveys for their patients in order to get feedback, and frequently in many places that feedback is very positive when tribes take over. None of this happens overnight. All of these things can happen sometimes. Why should tribes take any risk? So often I've heard, why should we do this? Why not make IHS do it? Why not make them do better? Well, I answer the negative question first. Why not make them do better? It's if you've tried over and 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 it hasn't worked, maybe it's time to try something else. And for 3 years now, IHS has been saying it can get the hospital recertified. For 2 years before that, they said every problem that CMS raised was fixed or would be fixed. That hasn't proven to be true. What 350 plus tribes around the country have proven is that tribes have been able to do this. Not a single tribally operated hospital has been decertified. We think this is, there are opportunities for improvement, and some of them are not available to IHS. IHS does not have the same flexibility. So one of the things tribes can do, this is on the next slide, one of the things tribes can do is if you can't recruit a doctor, because the salaries in the IHS are too low. A tribe can raise the salaries for its direct hires, where IHS can't. It's stuck with its salary scales. Tribes can adjust to meet the demand. It can do its own training. If IHS can't find enough people who can do billing and coding or to be radiology techs, they don't have a means to do a big training program. They have a scholarship program, but that's extremely limited and slow. But tribes can build a training program. They can be agile in meeting the needs. So part of that,
It's 7:20. So we have 10 minutes in our scheduled program. So the chairman suggested that maybe we can focus on the remaining questions.
that.
So we can get through those. I think we're pretty close to the end of the slide presentation anyway. I have several questions that are related to the topic that you were just talking about on certification. One of them is, should we let IHS fix the wrongdoing and then take over, or should we take over now? And then the remaining questions, I'll just kind of summarize, but basically, what steps has the tribe taken towards regaining accreditation? And if none, what is the plan to regain accreditation when we take over?
I think I gave the best answer I can give about why not make IHS do it. IHS has had 3 years to do it. The tribe began its planning process before the decertification occurred. But after, there was clearly some problems, but before it occurred, and the tribe stepped back. It started its planning. It started asking questions to draw information in to get it, but it stepped back from going forward with self-governance to go forward saying, because IHS said, we can do it, we can get it recertified. I sat in on many of those meetings, bi-weekly meetings with IHS. Well, next month we're going to be ready. Next month we'll submit the application. 3 months from now we'll submit the application. It's 3 years later, hasn't, or two in most of 3 years, hasn't happened yet. And what is certain is that in the current environment with the positions that are vacant or filled with temporary people, it isn't going to be successful. The tribe believes it can recruit and do that. It is not promising that it will be recertified in the first month. We anticipate it'll take a year or more to obtain that recertification because everyone is going to have to learn to work together. There's going to have to be new leadership. There are going to have to be positions recruited and filled. It is going to take time, but absolutely confident the tribe can do that. And what steps is it taking? There's very little it can do today to achieve recertification after it takes over, except to be prepared really well on day one to have the right people in place for leadership. And it's doing that, and that's in a sense what I described when I listed the decision to have the Winnebago comprehensive health care system set in place with a board and to start hiring key positions, executive director, health administrator, and other support people to be sure as we go on and we see from the IHS exactly where the vacancies are, there will be other recruitment that begins in advance of the assumption date, which we expect to be July 1, 2018, so that there are people ready to come to work immediately after the tribe takes over so that the programs can begin to improve. That really is, it no longer seems credible to wait for IHS, and the tribes have proven they can do it. What do we got?
So we have a couple questions about the Omaha tribe and its shares in the inpatient and ER. How do the Omaha tribe shares affect us, and how will this be negotiated, and how will they be divided?
Okay. The Omaha tribe, without question, has a share of the program in the inpatient department and in the emergency department. There are lots of ways of thinking about that. The Winnebago tribe is looking at it from the standpoint of what it thinks is the Winnebago share is, but with a complete understanding that Omaha has the same interest in ensuring that the resources that were committed to it are not diminished. Ultimately, both tribes, each tribe negotiates with Indian Health Service, and each tribe has a right to appeal if it, and both tribes for that matter, if the Omaha tribe thinks they didn't get enough and the Winnebago tribe thinks they didn't get enough, both of them might appeal. Or maybe it's just one. In any event, each tribe has the right to assure. How the negotiation will occur, I know a lot about how the negotiation between the Winnebago tribe and Indian Health Service will occur. There's kind of a formality, a process that's well understood about meeting to ensure you have all the information, then begin to meet to complete negotiation of funding amounts, including shares and documents, the funding agreement and the compact and so on. How the Omaha tribe will enter into discussions with the IHS, Indian Health Service, I don't know. That's them. I do know that the Winnebago tribe and the Omaha tribe, with the leadership of both chairmen, have had many meetings now and have had many exchanges of communications trying to think through what are the options for both tribes with regard to how this plays out over time. What I know for certain is that the Winnebago tribe is willing to operate all of those programs, not only for its own benefit and for the benefit of all Indians, but for all Indians who use it, including those from Omaha, under an agreement of, there could be many different forms of that, but under agreements that ensure that the Omaha's interest is identified and protected. Winnebago tribe is not willing to or interested in doing anything that undermines another tribe, but it is willing and wants to be able to continue to run the hospital and to assure a high-quality program available to everyone.
The next few questions are related to structure and governance for the health system. How are the new hospital board members going to be chosen? Who is in charge? And will future tribal councils be able to change the hospital management?
There will be, at some point, sometime in the next month or so, there will be advertisements undoubtedly for people to offer to serve on the Winnebago Comprehensive Healthcare System Board. There are designations in the bylaws. The bylaws were completed in December, and the focus of work has been on getting some key positions in place to prepare for long-term planning and for negotiation. The next up after some of these key positions are filled will be to advertise for the board members and to bring them in so that they can become part of all this planning process and take over ultimately the direction of it. In terms of what can the council do in the future, the council can't. I mean, I'd be an idiot, and you would know it if I said, oh no, the council can never do anything in the future. Once this is done, it's carved in stone. We all know that's not true. A future council can do it. What I also know, though, is that from around the country, when tribes have set up these kinds of systems to create a little bit of separation, to ensure an orderly management of their healthcare programs, there tends to be minimal interference in that. Not to say there's never any, but really quite minimal. A lot of pushback from other members of the leadership if it happens. A lot of work going on to be sure that it is as apolitical as possible and that it occurs just for the betterment of the health program at all times. Now, what I do know as well, and I would just say it out loud, is anytime a decision is made about a personnel thing in a small community, everyone is positive they know why it happened and that it was somebody that were the relative of somebody else or somebody else didn't like them or whatever. Sometimes that may be true, but most often it's not what's happening. But nobody talks about personnel matters in public or not officially in any way that you can be certain of what you know. So I'd urge all of you to be supportive of the council in its efforts to make it part of the culture of the tribe to run the health program in this way. Other questions?
So I have a few questions about, it's 7:29, so go quick. Who does the tribe interact with at IHS to protect the tribe's interests with respect to the IHS operations now? And is the tribe working with tribal members on IHS staff and open to recommendations from those folks with IHS?
So the tribe works with the CEO at the acting CEO. I think Mr. Fisher, right? Charles Fisher, I think, is the acting person now. They work with him. He's their most direct contact. There are ongoing contacts between the existing tribal health programs and various people in the Indian Health Program here. In addition, the tribe works with the area director, acting director, Mr. Driving Hawk, and in negotiations with a whole array of people from the area office and from headquarters, including the agency lead negotiator who's been designated to act for the secretary in the negotiation, Mr. Russ Peterson, who's the head of the environmental health program in Albuquerque and an experienced negotiator of self-governance agreements and a tribal advocate in most respects. In terms of what the tribe can learn from the employees who are there, Winnebago or Omaha or any other employee, as people, you're entitled to talk to the tribe. The tribe is not entitled to come to you and as an employee of the Indian Health Service and say, tell us what you think. There are formal ways for communication. You certainly can share a point of view just as a citizen, as a person, and those will certainly be weighed in the overall planning process.
How will the finances be handled?
Carefully and responsibly, and in compliance with all of the federal requirements for the administration of federal funds. The tribe has worked hard to have a clean audit, one with no material findings, that corresponds to all of the OMB requirements for the administration of funds, and has every intention of ensuring that continues. The tribe is working on making sure that it has specialists in the working with the finance department and directly at the hospital, so that contracts are entered into and managed responsibly and consistent with federal law, that revenue is accounted for and used as it's allowed to be used and not for other purposes, all of those things.
Myra, this is related to urban programs. Is it possible for urban Indian groups to apply for 638 funds to ensure health care for off-reservation Indians? There are 3 urban Aberdeen area funded groups.
Technically, no. Urban Indian programs receive their funding under Title V of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, as opposed to under either Title I or Title V of the Tribal Self-Determination Act, the Indian Self-Determination Act. There are some exceptions and there are some interesting arrangements, but none of the urban Indian programs in the Great Plains can apply to receive direct 638 funds. Those are dedicated to service units, IHS operated or tribally operated service units.
We have a couple of questions that are related to contract health PRC, and basically how will those responsibilities be handled, and will contract health stay the same?
Let me start with the second question. I hope it doesn't stay the same. I hope it improves. And that's what I expect will happen. There will be no new money for contract health, so the resources remain limited, but the effective administration of those funds can help manage them and make it possible for the program to run better. The tribe will run the contract health service program. Its intention is to take that program as well as others and to administer it on behalf of all the people who benefit, the tribal members who live within the CHSDA who are entitled to contract health service.
Myra, this is the last question.
Okay.
Does the tribe have an at-will policy, and if so, will that apply at the hospital?
I don't know the
I
answer
think
to
it's a
that question.
transition.
I think Right. The tribe, like most tribes, I just need to verify it, most tribes have an at-will employment policy. Federal employees who remain in an IPA or an MOA will not be subject to that. Their relationship, they can be asked to leave it, but they go back as a federal employee and they're entitled to the rights of federal employees, which will be the subject of lots more meetings and discussions to be sure every IHS employee has those rights. Tribal employees who work for the tribe now, many of whom have worked for the tribe for a long, 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 long time, are subject to at-will policies. At-will does not mean random, arbitrary actions. It just means that all of the protections and time-consuming steps, sometimes part of civil service employment, are not necessarily there. And while we want to be sure every employee is treated fairly and has protections, we also want to assure that the complaints that often come where there are employees who have problems, the procedural things don't get in the way of moving forward when necessary to make sure that all the employees are able to do their job as well as possible. Is that it? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. We promised that you could ask the first question after we got to it, and since I'm way over, that's it. Okay. The Commission Corps has effectively closed down the Winnebago IHS hospital function. Most, if not all, patients are referred to Sioux City hospitals for admittance. The tribe has been duped into believing we are going to compact for a hospital when, in reality, we don't have it. Let me just take what I think is. Okay, so the question is, are you really getting a hospital? The reality is it is a hospital still. It has a pretty low patient count, but there are hospitals in the country that have lower patient counts. It is still receiving and admitting inpatients, and it has an active emergency department that's still providing care. The tribe is committed to and will move forward on becoming recertified by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services in order to assure that it is providing the highest quality, that it can provide high quality care, and expects that the patient counts will go up. I'm not sure I can blame all of the reduction in patient count on the Commission Corps officers. I think what more is there is when there were problems at the hospital, in the emergency department and inpatient, leadership in many cases chose not to keep admitting patients where there were risks and instead to make sure they went to a hospital that was certified. One of the reasons the tribe, as they've communicated them to us, as we go forward, and one of the things we've said over and over to IHS, the tribe has said, and I say we, I'm now totally invested with the council in this project. What they've said is, we don't trust you. We want to, but we don't trust you to keep our hospital open and to keep it providing the care it should provide, so we're going to take it over and do that. So they are compacting for a hospital, and the intention is to have one. Can we guarantee that 10 years from now there'll be a hospital? I don't know. Healthcare economics are impossible to forecast, but most tribes that took over hospitals, including ones that had been abandoned essentially by IHS, are in fact continued to carry out hospital programs. Some have chosen voluntarily to reduce the level of care. There's no plan to do that here. The plan is to get it recertified and run a really good hospital, and including inpatient emergency department. Yes? Oh, they haven't actually signed the agreement. Okay, I apologize. I said they had signed the agreement. I know there are discussion with the University of Nebraska Medical Center. I know there have been exchanges of drafts and a lot of discussion. I have every expectation there will be an agreement, but it hasn't actually been signed now. I overstated that. But the fact of it is UNMC has committed its support for the tribe's work in this. I think that's it. I want to mention in your PowerPoint, there are some other slides that you may find interesting, that help guide you about what the scope of Indian health can be, what the law allows, the process, the steps that we go through. All of that's there, and we simply ran out of time. There will be other meetings, community meetings, I'm told, to ensure that you have opportunities to be informed about what's happening as we go along. Thank you so much for your attention and for really terrific questions. Thank you. Chairman?
Okay, as I said earlier, we're going to try and stick as close as possible to the time schedule. Those that are in attendance and those that are watching, the PowerPoint that we have displayed on the wall, it's going to be on our website. I know that there were some handouts here. You can take those home. So those that are interested in the information that will be provided on the PowerPoint, it's available. Also, the questions that were presented this evening, we have a group of questions here. We're going to display those questions on our website, and we're going to provide answers to each of those questions. So not only did you hear it here this evening, you'll be able to see it on our website. Was there anything else that we needed to take care of?
The chairman and the rest of the council, we're doing this for our relatives, for our people, the people that come to the hospital for health care. We know we can do better, and we're still speaking up for those that have no voice. Just recently, our dialysis patients, our tribal members, in the middle of winter, they were sent a memo that they were no longer to be picked up by the drivers. They would have to come to the hospital to catch a ride to their dialysis appointment. And chairman had drafted up a letter, and then they sent in a response, and then on behalf of our tribal members, our dialysis patients, and we fixed that situation. And all of these things that we look at the care and the communications between patient and the hospital, and then also the follow-up when they referred out, then all of this is very, this communication is really lacking. And that's something that we need to do, improve that. We keep asking them for a policy to communicate to the patients. They're talking about the PRC, but nowhere in that communication has ever talked to the patient and say, okay, well, you got Medicare, you're not covered. It's after they've received a bill that they identify that. And most of the tribal members, they only have Part A, which only covers, it doesn't cover outpatient visits. And so there's a lot of lack of communications, and to receive these notices in the mail, it's troubling for our elders that don't understand those. They were never told, that you would be responsible for that bill because you have Medicare, because you have tribal insurance, so that we're advocating for our people that utilize this facility. The ones that come in from Sioux City, there's no communication. It should be there. So that's, we're trying to provide quality care for our tribal members and anybody that comes to the hospital.
Thank you, Jim, for your statement. Also, we are planning to have other community meetings. We haven't established a date on those, but our intent is to provide as much information as possible to everyone that goes to this hospital and uses it, so they know exactly what's going to be taking place. I anticipate the next meeting will probably be in 30, 45 days. As we get closer to that date, as Myra mentioned, we identified July 1st as the date that we will assume operation. So if everything goes well, July 1st is the date. So watch our website, pull it down, look at the announcements that pertain to self-governance, and I believe that we'll have a better turnout next time. The weather was discouraging, plus there's a game down in Bancroft, and I'm sure that quite a few of them went to the game. But also, we have some chicken and some other items in the back. I encourage you to take some home with you, share it with your family. And I appreciate each one of you coming this evening. And by a show of hands, did we provide enough information for you for now? Okay, I saw a few hands out there, so what our intent was accomplished. So with that, thank you again, and that'll conclude our community meeting.